The heroes of D-Day honoured 80 years on, but the leader of the free world says everything they fought for is back under threat. Inspired by the greatest generation, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, said Western allies must step up once more and protect Ukraine.
Make no mistake, we will not bow down. We will not forget. If you want to know the price of freedom, come here to Normandy. Come to Normandy and look.
You're the savior of the people.
President Zelensky was given a hero's welcome in Normandy, where 10 years ago it was Vladimir Putin meeting veterans.
Putin, who gave me a medal, a bravery award, and then goes and pulls a trick like marching into the Ukraine. It's terrible.
Putin was not invited this time round. Instead, the Russian president held his own gathering of nations and warned he could arm rogue states to attack the West. Our Moscow correspondent went along and spoke to the Kremlin.
A quick word for British media, Sky News.
British media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here?
Not at all. Why should I be?
This is absolutely upside down situation. We're not targeting anybody in Europe.
A bluff or sowing the seeds for a new world order. Ivor Bennett joins us live from St. Petersburg with his analysis. Also on the programme, another moment of horror in Gaza. 40 people are reportedly killed in the bombing of a UN school. Israeli forces say it was an assault on Hamas militants. Agnès Callamard, the head of Amnesty International, gives me her reaction.
It looks as if every Palestinian man, woman and children has become a lawful target simply because they are near in the vicinity of Hamas.
They were the soldiers that helped bring about the end of the Second World War. For that, D-Day veterans were honoured today by prime ministers, presidents and the King. They received heartfelt tributes from young and old who gathered at sites across France to say thank you to the greatest generation. And yet the 80th anniversary wasn't just a moment to reflect on their sacrifice. World leaders used the occasion to issue a warning that the very freedom D-Day troops fought for is now under threat. With the war in Ukraine in his thoughts, President Biden said dark forces were once again testing the resolve of the West. And he urged those listening never to bow down to tyrants. It was a message echoed by President Macron, who added to the warm welcome given to Ukraine's President Zelensky in Normandy. But one ally was missing, the ally that in fact lost the most lives in World War II. Russia was not invited. Its leader, now a pariah, was instead hosting his own event back home, an economic forum of nations sympathetic to his cause. The likes of China, Brazil and even the Taliban were invited to attend. We'll be live in St. Petersburg shortly to ask how this might play into Putin's plans to create a new world order. But first, let's hear from those world leaders who gathered in France. Here's our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, with his report from Normandy.
The enduring resonance of D-Day brings the world's leaders here to Normandy to reflect on the past and to consider the future. Among them, a different dress code for a leader fighting a war at home. Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in France to warm embraces and a loud cheer. He was among friends and also friendly strangers. An American D-Day veteran here hailed Zelensky for his leadership.
You're the savior of the people. Here's my eyes.
On a day when we remember the sacrifices of the past, he a reminder that Europe is still a continent darkened by war.
Thank you to the people of Ukraine for their bravery and their love of freedom. We are here and we shall not be weakened.
A decade ago, the Russian president was in Normandy for D-Day. Now Vladimir Putin is a pariah. There were no Russian officials present. But once it was very different. Here is Putin in 2013, presenting medals to British veterans. One of those veterans was here today, still full of life, but fearful that history is being repeated again.
War is no answer to the various things, and I have in my pocket now a message from Putin, who gave me a medal, a bravery award, and then goes and pulls a trick like marching into the Ukraine. It's terrible, but I just can't understand the human mind anymore.
If that seems like despair, then the American president brought resolve. At 81 years old, Joe Biden is almost certain to be the last US president who was alive at the time D-Day took place in 1944.
We will not walk away. Because if we do, Ukraine will be subjugated, and it will not end there. Ukraine's neighbors will be threatened. All of Europe will be threatened.
It is a troubling parallel, and this is a volatile time. In Normandy today, the past was precious, the future precarious. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Normandy.
Well, our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons joins me now from Normandy. Adam, a day that looked back at the past but also warned about the future. Dealing with the commemoration first. From here, it looked like it was an extraordinary fitting tribute to that dwindling number of D-Day veterans and their fallen comrades. What was it like being there?
It was actually genuinely quite a moving and engaging couple of days, starting yesterday with those commemorations about the airborne troops, the paratroopers tumbling out of the sky, going onto Pegasus Bridge last night, marking the moment when the first troops landed here in northern France. And then today, of course, on the beaches, overriding everything, Dominic, is the fact that you meet these veterans, these absolutely astonishing, vibrant people, 98, 99, 100 years old. You heard one of them there, Alec. He's 99 years old, and he has strident opinions. He has memories of what happened. And those opinions, you hear again and again, are that, A, what they went through in 1944 was not glorious, but it was absolutely terrifying, bloody, brutal, and that they were petrified. And that secondly, so many of these veterans I've spoken to say that they're not the heroes, those are the people who died on these beaches, and that the reason they died was for a better future. And yes, I've heard many times people despairing about the fact that there is war in Ukraine and that there continues to be wars all around the world. And I suppose the final point we should say about these veterans is that question of them dwindling. Time is the challenge that all of us face and all of us lose to. The simple fact is that, as with so many commemorations, they tend to go in fives. This one is the 80th. The next one, the next big one, maybe 85. And you do wonder how many of these veterans, who will then be 104, 105 years old, will be around, perhaps able to join a celebration in Normandy.
Yeah, and as you say, hanging over all this, the knowledge that another land war is underway in Europe, and warnings from various leaders about the threat of freedom being endangered once again by tyranny. How much did that overshadow the events, you think, that you've been witnessing for the last 2 days?
I think this was a display of very skillful diplomacy and the understanding of optics. It didn't overshadow it. They were very careful, all of these people, whether that was Emmanuel Macron, whether that was Joe Biden. They went to great lengths to give primacy to the veterans, the Légion d'honneur that have been handed out by Macron. Those were the things that were spoken about first. But everybody knew that there was a subtext to this, that it was about what is going on the Eastern Front. Here's a good example. We said there that there were no Russian officials at this event. There had been Russian officials invited, and that invitation was then rescinded by the French. Now, it might be because they had a pang of conscience, thought it's not reasonable. I wonder whether the two things coincided, was the rescinding of that invitation and the realization that Zelensky would be able to come. There was no way, clearly, the Russians could be here at the same time. as President Zelensky. And I think his presence changed the dynamic. The simple fact is that when you have Joe Biden, Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz, Rishi Sunak, Charles Michel from the European Council and many others, it is an opportunity to talk money, it is an opportunity to talk about the future. Perhaps more than anything, it is the chance to use this big set-piece event with all the pomp and circumstance that goes with it to announce to the world we are still four square behind Ukraine, and I wonder whether Joe Biden's determination to link the Second World War and what he said was the danger of Russia taking over Europe once again. I wonder if that was a message to his domestic audience to rein in behind his own determination to fund Ukraine's war.
Adam Parsons in Normandy, thank you very much. Well, the Soviet Union was crucial to the Allied victory in World War II, but Russia was not represented, as Adam was saying there, to the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Instead, Vladimir Putin is hosting an economic forum in his hometown of St. Petersburg. Members of the BRICS alliance, Brazil, India, China and South Africa were among those invited, as well as Zimbabwe, Bolivia and the Taliban. The eyebrow-raising guest list, all clearly symbolic of Russia and China's ambition to build an alternative world order. Moscow correspondent Ivor Bennett is live for us tonight in St. Petersburg. Ivor, Russians are enormously proud of their country's victory over Nazi Germany in the Second World War. How much do you think their absence from these events in Normandy rankles them and their leader? And how much is he taking advantage of all this?
Yeah, if there's one thing that really unites Russians, I think it is that tremendous pride in their country's contribution as the Soviet Union to the defeat of Nazi Germany. Around 27 million Soviet citizens died during World War II. Nearly every family here was affected, and that sense of collective grief is still felt here today, and it's partly why Victory Day is still so important here. So the fact Russia wasn't invited, I think, really does hurt them. Initially, the Kremlin tried to shrug it off, saying that they're focused on their own 80th anniversary events next year. But later, Russia's foreign ministry, with its spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, accused the West of trying to erase history. And I think that really sums up how the Kremlin truly feels, because a lot of Russians genuinely feel that the West doesn't properly recognise and respect Moscow's contribution to World War II. And it's why Vladimir Putin said something similar in his speech on Red Square during Victory Day this year. In terms of how he's using it now, well, events here in St. Petersburg really did offer quite a dramatic juxtaposition to what was happening on the beaches of Normandy, part of this attempt, as you say, by Moscow to construct this new multipolar global economy, one that's not dominated by the West. And it was all kicked off last night with a fresh threat from Vladimir Putin, a response, he says, to NATO allies giving the green light to Ukraine to use their weapons to strike inside Russia. Here's my report. On the anniversary of D-Day, Russia was making new friends and new threats. The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
We are thinking that if they consider it possible to deliver such weapons to the combat zone, to launch strikes on our territory and create problems for us, why don't we have the right to supply weapons of the same type to some regions of the world where they can be used to launch strikes on sensitive facilities of the countries that do it to Russia?
The Kremlin claims it's merely responding to provocations.
British media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
But isn't it the other way round?
This is absolutely upside down situation. We're not targeting anybody in Europe. We're not targeting any country of NATO or EU, but we're hearing and we're watching the aggressive approach from them.
So does this language bother delegates here? Apparently not.
I didn't follow the comments.
You haven't seen the comments?
No, I haven't seen the comments. Yeah, sorry.
As for China's envoy, no answer. Are you concerned at all about Vladimir Putin's comments that Russia could send weapons to other countries to strike Western targets? Can I ask you about dual-use goods? Is the West right Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Sorry.
There was a time when Western leaders and investors came here, but the guest list is very different now, as Russia tries to build a new world order. The war in Ukraine is like one giant elephant in the room here. There's no mention of the so-called special military operation, and there's no talk of these latest threats from the Kremlin either. So in terms of winning friends and influencing people, it feels like Russia's succeeding here.
We need to continue the cooperation with Russia on the field of energy.
Even Hungary's foreign minister turned up, an EU and NATO country increasingly at odds with other members.
So what?
Some people might say you're guilty of sending the wrong signals.
But what is the wrong signal? Peace is a wrong signal. Desire for peace is a wrong signal. The sanction policy of the European Union has failed entirely.
Others would beg to differ, but you won't find those voices here. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, St. Petersburg.
So, Ivor, sort of two parallel universes there, one that you're witnessing in St. Petersburg and one in Normandy. China and Russia trying to build this alternative universe or alternative world order. How much is that working? How much are those efforts working? And should the West be worried by all this and also by Vladimir Putin's increasingly ominous threats?
Yeah, I think it will be a concern for the West, certainly. I mean, the fact that the war isn't spoken about here at the the International Economic Forum, that wasn't a surprise. But what was a surprise, I think, was the reluctance among delegates, as you saw there, to talk about it. I mean, I find it very hard to believe that Brazil's ambassador to Moscow hadn't seen Vladimir Putin's comments, and that was 12 hours on from him making it. But I think that does really give a sense that in other parts of the world, there is a sense that what's happening in Ukraine, the situation with Russia, that is now the norm, and that they have to be pragmatic about it. And that is why we're seeing so many countries here from Asia, from Africa, from the Middle East, here to make deals. The consequences of the war in Ukraine, the sanctions, the market turbulence, the global tensions, they appear to be baked in here. They're just seen as yet more economic hurdles to overcome. So I think there is certainly a wider diplomatic war to be fought here by the West, one that they perhaps underestimated. In terms of the threats made by Vladimir Putin, I think that does represent an uptick in the rhetoric. This is the first time he's kind of raised this prospect of sending missiles to other countries to strike Western targets. The Kremlin wouldn't expand on which countries, which targets, but it is a thinly veiled threat, and it came alongside him reiterating Russia's readiness to use nuclear weapons. And all of this, I think, speaks to an increasingly open, confident and confrontational Russia, and I think that certainly will be a cause for concern for the West.
Ivor Bennett in St. Petersburg, thank you very much. Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined now by Mark Voyger, former Special Advisor for Russian and Eurasian Affairs to the Commanding General of US Army Europe, and also Dr. Donald Jensen, who is a senior advisor at the Russia and Europe Centre at the United States Institute for Peace and a former diplomat in Moscow. Thank you very much for joining us both. I assume you've been listening to this report on what's been happening in St. Petersburg. Dr. Jensen, first, if I could ask you, what do you make of what Vladimir Putin's doing here? Quite canny geopolitical stagecraft, do you think?
I don't know how canny it is, but it's a lot of flash and bang to attract attention, to court the people outside the West, whether you call it global South or global community, whatever you want to call it. I think you have to be careful, though, to separate the glitter from the reality. And the reality is that Russia has an uphill fight if it wants to overthrow the world order. And the delegates in Petersburg are doing just as your reporter said. They're playing both sides. They're acting out of pragmatic self-interest. But that's quite a bit different than overturning the world order in the favor of Russia or China. So let's watch the show, but let's separate rhetoric from reality.
Mark Voyger, I mean, we've got this sort of symbolism, I suppose. You have the West gathering in Normandy, celebrating, commemorating the victory of freedom over tyranny, and then people who many people regard as tyrants gathering in St. Petersburg. Is there a danger, do you think, by not inviting the Russians? Obviously, there are many good reasons not to, but by inviting President Zelensky there instead to Normandy, there's a risk of these warnings kind of becoming self-fulfilling, because it could be antagonising the Russians and encouraging them to form close alliances with other potential enemies of the West.
Well, Dominic, the Russians have antagonized, the entire civilized world, we would say. I mean, not only the West, but the democratic nations of Asia and others. So Normandy is a symbol of not only of victory; it's a symbol of a victory of democracy over totalitarianism, and a Putin's regime that seeks to restore a new totalitarian system in Russia has no business in Normandy. So yes, Ukraine deserves to be invited there. Kudos to the Western leaders for hosting President Zelensky. Putin and his regime have no place there, and obviously they've gathered a forum that is dominated by this so-called arc of dictatorships or authoritarians, and sadly, many from the global south have joined this event in St. Petersburg, which shows that the Russians and China is really trying to build the impression that there is an alternative world order, and the kind of the leaders of the one side of the global equation, and they're not as isolated as the West would like to think.
But Dr. Jensen, doesn't it double Vladimir Putin's resolve to carry on antagonizing the West and others to support him doing all this?
Well, I'm not sure we should be so concerned about Vladimir Putin's feelings. We should be concerned about the interests of the United States and the West. And certainly a lot of people in Petersburg today sympathize with Russia's point of view, but there are many differences. Brazil, for example, does not support the war in Ukraine. It's there. China and Russia themselves have differences, as we saw last week, over energy. So I think it's too simple to lump them all in one place. They go to some fancy cocktail parties and say they're all uniting to undermine the West. That's not the case. Ukraine is holding its own. As Mark said, Ukraine deserves to be in Normandy. And the Russians, in fact, are trying to, I would say almost scrambling now, to come up with leaders elsewhere, allies elsewhere, to press ahead with their project to maintain the global order. China itself, I might add, has a lot of stake economically and otherwise at the current global situation. So Putin can talk all he wants, Putin can threaten, but that's not the same as success.
Right, and Mark, in a sense, China's the one to worry about, isn't it? Russia is sort of becoming more of a vassal state of China with every passing day this war carries on. But how much is this attempt to build an alternative world order? What does that mean, and how much of a threat is that to the Western hegemony in the world, do you think?
The so-called alternative world order that both Russia and China are proposing harkens back to the dark age of empires, global empires. That means strong imperialist nations surrounded by vassal satellite states that act at their behest, that have no independent foreign and domestic policies. This is the world of the 18th and 19th century, the division of the world in spheres of influence. That's the world of global that brought us to global wars, to world wars in the 20th century. And therefore, it is extremely cynical on the part of both Moscow and Beijing to claim that this type of a world would be a more just and a fair global arrangement than the existing international order.
And finally, Dr. Jensen, the war in Gaza we're about to report on this programme. How much is that making things harder for the West? Because it's opening the West to accusations of hypocrisy and double standards, isn't it, with the way they're supporting Israel but opposing Russia and Ukraine?
It certainly is. That sentiment, sir, is very widespread among the people in Petersburg for a variety of reasons. And whatever you think about who to support in the action in Gaza, certainly that's lost to the West fans and friends. But we have to keep the longer term in mind. Russia is no place to upset the world order. China is more likely, and China itself does not want to overturn a world order to its disadvantage. China wants to be a great power, as Mark said. So does Russia. Whether they make it we're a long way from seeing that. And just seeing people who show up in Petersburg today is no way to measure the way the wind is blowing, as the Chinese would say.
Donald Jensen, Mark Voyger, thank you very much for those insights. You are watching The World with me, Dominic Waghorn. After the break, Sky News verifies US weapon fragments found at the scene of Israel's attack on a school in Gaza. The attack left more than 35 people dead. The IDF insists they were targeting a Hamas base.
Westminster may seem far from Grimsby and Cleethorpes, but not for long. With a general election around the corner, we're bringing you Sunak versus Starmer, live from Grimsby. Putting their cases forward and facing questions from a live audience. Who will convince you to give them the keys to this place? The battle for number 10. Get the full story first on Sky News.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky's West of England correspondent.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. We help you to understand the world with us.
I'm Adam Parsons, I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
Welcome back. Health officials in Gaza say that 40 people, including women and children, were killed today in an Israeli airstrike on a UN school. Israel's defense forces say the Al-Sadi school was targeted due to Hamas militants operating on the site. Tonight, Sky News analysis has shown a fragment of a US-made bomb at the site. In a moment, I'll be getting reaction from human rights group Amnesty International. First, to report on the school attack from our international correspondent, Alex Rossi.
The depressing arc of the war in Gaza is now as familiar as it is grim. Each day, Palestinian families mourn their dead. On the ground, the bodies of the victims are laid out. Some are covered with blankets. Others have been placed in body bags. In the early hours, the Israeli military hit this UN school, where thousands of displaced civilians were sheltering. Grief, along with hunger and fear, are ever present here, and people do not know how they will cope with their loss.
Every day there's news of another martyr. Every single day. A cousin, a brother, a stranger, an uncle.
They keep talking about a ceasefire, and then they say ceasefire talks have failed, or a ceasefire will take time. Meanwhile, bodies are being torn into pieces.
At the hospital, where medical services are nearing collapse, they do what they can for the survivors. But the injured keep coming. The IDF claims it tried to limit civilian casualties through aerial surveillance, and its fighter jets were targeting Hamas and Islamic Jihad militants who were operating in the building, who'd taken part in the October the 7th massacre. And the bloodshed shows no sign of ending. Israeli troops continue to push into Rafah as they also intensify their operations in central Gaza. For the people trapped here, the chance of a ceasefire feels a long way away. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Well, let's cross to Washington now, and Sky's Mark Stone. Mark, we've both been Middle East correspondents when we were reporting there. Any one of these incidents would have caused days of outrage, soul-searching and quite often condemnation from America. But they're now happening with such regularity and so often that we just move on from one to the other to another one. There isn't really time to catch up with what's happened. Do you think that the fact that this has happened again, and another strike, I think, later on in the day somewhere else in Gaza, equally devastating, and the fact that American ordnance appears to have been used again, will that have much impact in America, or are they also caught up in this kind of cycle of devastation following one attack after another?
I think the latter. It's very, very hard to keep up. It is only 10 days or so since the strike in Rafah in the south that was perceived to be a massive crossing of President Biden's red line. He said it wasn't because a precision weapon was used, and that weapon caused secondary explosions. There would be an investigation, we were told, and we were told today that investigation hasn't yet concluded. And even before it has, another strike equally devastating. The Israelis say, as Alex was saying, that there were some 20 to 30 Hamas militants inside that building. They've provided no evidence for that. The Hamas-run health ministry says that 40 people were killed. Again, we've not got no independent clarification on that. But the fact is, a lot of people died in this latest strike. And again, John Kirby has said tonight, the the president's spokesperson, there will be an investigation. But you and I both know that Israeli investigations, they say they launch them. Very, very rarely do you get concrete conclusions from them. And then on top of that, very rarely does it actually change policy. And you're right, tonight there has been another strike. I was sent a video from a contact in central Gaza a couple of hours ago that shows a strike on a building. And I want you to watch very closely at the very beginning of the video we're about to play, and you will see the missile hitting the building. Have a look at this. So you can see there, Dominic, the impact of that explosion there. I'm told this is the Dalal building, the Dalal tower block in central Gaza. It's owned by one family who run a plastics company. There was a warning that the IDF gave a short time before they destroyed that building. My source has told me that 3 people were killed inside that building. But it is another illustration that if there was any sense this war is somehow coming to a conclusion, coming to a resolution, absolutely not. And tonight, the same person I've been talking to has said that the IDF is warning residents of other high tower blocks in central Gaza, an area, incidentally, a particular area where people have not been told to evacuate from, the broader area. Those buildings, too, will be targeted.
Mark, what's happened with this American-led diplomatic initiative to try and bring about, yet again, renewed efforts, it seems, to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, frankly, it looks like it's in pieces. I mean, it was only Friday when President Biden stood at the podium in the dining room of the White House and made that extraordinary announcement that took everyone by surprise, suggested that he had come to an arrangement, that he was announcing an Israeli proposal that would present a three-phase plan that would lead to peace. I mean, it seemed too good to be true, and so it may well have been, because the Hamas today has said that they've got issues with parts of the deal. But more than that, the Israelis too have said that it doesn't quite stack up. They're not happy with the deal that Biden incidentally said was an Israeli deal. We know that the Israelis aren't happy because in an attempt to push it through, the Americans are using their seat at the at the table of the Security Council at the UN to try and force a resolution on the deal. And the Israelis have said that they are not happy with that deal. So a Biden pronouncement with bells and whistles, so it seemed on Friday night, and yet in just a few short days, it appears at the moment to be very, very far from anything like a deal.
Yeah, more depressing news there. Mark, thank you for your update from Washington. Well, we asked the Israeli Defense Forces for an interview today about all of this, but they said no spokesperson was available. You're watching The World with me, Dominic Waghorn. After the break, more reaction to the situation in Gaza. I sit down with the head of Amnesty International, who told me Israel does not have any red lines in the conflict with Hamas. Welcome back. Well, Sky News has analysed and verified a fragment of a US-made bomb at the site where a school was struck by the Israeli military earlier today. 40 people, including women and children, were killed in the operation. Today I spoke to the Secretary-General of Amnesty International, Agnès Callamard, who told me that Israel has no red lines.
A fundamental, cardinal principle of international law is a distinction between civilians and military targets. A second principle is that you warn civilians before pursuing an attack which may harm them. From what I understand, from what I have read coming from the UN, they were not warned. Civilians were not warned that the Israelis were about to launch a strike. We need an international investigation run by UN agencies, run by the International Criminal Court. That is what Amnesty International has been asking for as long as 8 months. The problem right now is that there are no one in Gaza able to carry out those investigations except some media workers who are there and people working for Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch and the UN. But we need the space to carry out those international investigations.
What the Israelis would say, of course, is that they investigate their own incidents. They also say in this particular incident that Hamas was kind of embedded amongst the civilians in this school and were a threat to their soldiers nearby. I mean, it's very hard for Israel, isn't it, to attack an enemy like this that is deliberately embedding itself and hiding itself amongst the civilian population.
There is no doubt it's very hard. There is no doubt it's very hard to attack such a small territories with such a density of population, a territory that has been under military occupation and a territory that has been under siege for decades. The problem right now is that in the way Israel is pursuing its military campaign, it has transformed a military campaign against Hamas into a collective punishment of the Palestinians. It looks as if every Palestinian, man, woman and children, has become a lawful target simply because they are near in the vicinity of Hamas. This is a complete violation of every principle that was enacted in 1948.
But aren't Hamas using those principles of international law to become almost sort of invulnerable? If they do hide themselves amongst the civilian population and it's against the international law, as you see it, to go after them there, it's impossible for Israel then to go in after them and to get their hostages back. What are they meant to do?
What are they meant to do? Find other ways.
What would you recommend? What would be your advice to the Israelis?
It's not for me to tell what they have to do. It is for me to say what they should not do. And what they should not do is deliberately or indiscriminately or disproportionately targeting civilians. What they should not do is committing crimes which, according to the International Court of Justice, is coming very close to amount to genocide. Are you going to go ahead in the name of targeting Hamas? Are you prepared to commit genocide? That is a question that we need to ask, because right now, everything that the Israeli authorities are doing indicate that they have no red lines. Yes, Hamas is a lawful target, but not at all cost.
What about Hamas?
Not at all cost. Hamas has its own responsibility, and we are calling for them to be held to account, including through the International Criminal Court. The prosecutor has issued the demand for an arrest warrant. I hope that they will be granted so that those Hamas leaders and indeed the Israeli leaders can be held to account.
What do you say to Israelis who would say that if they follow your advice and your interpretation of international law, which is different to theirs, they will never get their hostages back and they won't be able to destroy Hamas, who carried out this appalling day of atrocities on October the 7th, the worst loss of Jewish life since the Second World War, which, as you say, we are commemorating today?
Absolutely. First and foremost, we need, and we acknowledge at Amnesty International, that what was committed on October 7 was horrific. It amounted to war crimes and possible crimes against humanity. There is no doubt. And those responsible for planning it and perpetrating it must be held to account. Point number one. Point number two, though, the campaign of retaliation in response to what happened on October 7 cannot become, let me repeat it, cannot become a campaign of collective punishment for every Palestinian people. There are limitations. There are limitations.
Would you agree, though, that what Hamas did on October the 7th and what they've done since, the conditions they've held these hostages in, is in a completely different league in terms of human rights breaches to what Israel is doing in self-defense now?
No, I will not agree. First of all, I'm not comparing. Second of all, absolutely, Hamas committed war crimes, possible crimes against humanity. According to the prosecutor, they have committed crimes against humanity. The holding of hostages is absolutely in violation of international law. Amnesty International and others are calling for the unconditional release of the hostages. The best way to get there is through a ceasefire.
There is a hope, obviously, at the moment that we will be moving on from the military phase of this to a more political direction, and there is some hope for some progress towards a diplomatic solution to the conflict. America, though, seems to think that Israel is not crossing any red lines in Rafah. What do you make of the way America, but also its ally Britain, is dealing with this diplomatically? Are they doing enough to put enough pressure on both parties to this conflict to bring about some negotiated end to it? Well,
absolutely not. We believe that the United States hold a very large part of responsibility in the fact that this very cruel war has been going on for 8 months. The United States has failed to denounce Israel's multiple violation of international law, which, by the way, is not just my interpretation. The United States has used its veto to prevent any kind of ceasefire at the Security Council. The United States is continuing to arm Israel against every logical steps. If you want to stop violation, then you stop arming. The United States is not putting clear red lines in the sand. The United States has failed the Israeli people, has failed the Palestinian people, and currently is failing the entire world because it is breaking down the rule-based order.
Has the ICC is now indicting or wants to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu, but also the Hamas leaders. In your mind, is Prime Minister Netanyahu a war criminal?
Yes. Absolutely. We at Amnesty International have been monitoring the situation for many decades, and I can assure you the war crimes are piling up and piling up. And they also include war crimes from Hamas, there is no doubt. But the Israeli authorities have committed many war crimes, and according to us, they also have committed the crimes against humanity of apartheid.
The danger, though, isn't it, is that the ICC's warrant has led to a huge amount of criticism of the ICC.
Not huge.
Isn't there a danger, though, that the ICC is marginalised because of what it's done? Has it not overreached? Has its prosecutors overreached in their decision?
Absolutely not. It has made the ICC absolutely relevant and central to what is happening. It has made accountability central to that crisis, where everyone else
But if America's ignoring it, if Britain chooses to ignore it, those are two hugely important powers.
I agree, but there are others.
That weakens it, doesn't it? Doesn't it undermine the ICC?
Well, no, the United States has not even ratified the International Criminal Court Statute. So, what's new? What's new? This country is not upholding a formidable instrument for the delivery of justice. There is nothing new there. They are only pursuing an approach which suits their interest at the moment.
Just moving on from the Gaza conflict, more broadly speaking, we're seeing today, we're commemorating the triumph of freedom over tyranny, but we're seeing authoritarians across the world on the march, in the ascendancy. How concerned are you about what that means for human rights globally and also the risk of much more global conflict?
We are witnessing a multiplication of those practices everywhere, from Russia to Asia, from China to Burkina Faso. So absolutely, we are at a critical juncture as an international community. We have right now a conflict in Gaza that is spiraling and threatening, of course, Palestinians and Israelis, but also the entire rule-based order. But we have so many other conflicts in Sudan, in Myanmar, in the Democratic Republic of Congo that are completely ignored, even though the violations are huge. We have authoritarian leaders prepared to continue their rules and violate basic freedoms. We believe that this is as close to the abyss as we have ever been. And this is why when we have the International Court of Justice doing the right thing, when we have the International Criminal Court prosecutor doing the right thing, when we have civil society saying, no, let's hold on, let's uphold the rule of law, that is hope. That principle of 1948, the principle enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the notion that we are all born free and equal just because we are human, that's what we need to fight for against those leaders.
Agnès Callamard there from Amnesty International. Well, some breaking news in the last few minutes. The president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, has said his party, the African National Congress, is inviting other parties to form a government of national unity. It comes after the ANC only won 40% of the vote in the country's election last week. Let's have a listen to what he had to say in the last few minutes.
As the ANC, with its 40% return of votes, cannot really set up government without cooperating with others. The discussions have been constructive, robust, thoroughgoing, and have enabled us to emerge with a unified consensus position. The ANC acknowledges that we are at a moment of fundamental consequence in the life of our nation. Our country requires extraordinary leadership and courage to plot a way forward.
Cyril Ramaphosa there speaking about the latest development in South African politics after his party, the ANC's grip on power in South Africa was broken after 30 years in the recent elections. More on that later. But to Italy now, in an exclusive interview with our Italian partners Sky TG24, Amanda Knox has expressed her disappointment over being reconvicted of slander in an Italian court. Knox was sentenced to 3 years in prison for accusing an innocent man of the 2007 murder of her British roommate, Meredith Kercher. She will, though, not serve time back in prison due to the 4 years she spent there until 2011. Siobhan Robbins now reports.
When Amanda Knox arrived at court in Italy, she was hoping to remove the final legal stain from her name. Instead, she was reconvicted of slandering a bar owner she accused of murdering British student Meredith Kercher in 2007. 24 hours later, speaking in Italian to Sky News' sister station, she had this message for local media.
Io non sono Foxy Knoxy.
I'm not Foxy Knoxy. I'm Amanda Knox. I didn't slander anyone, and I didn't kill anyone. I am a victim.
Nicknamed Foxy Knoxy by the tabloid press, Amanda Knox was 22 when she and her boyfriend were jailed for the murder of roommate Meredith Kercher. The 21-year-old was sexually assaulted and stabbed to death in the Italian city of Perugia. The pair were later completely cleared of the crime, but Amanda was found guilty of slandering Patrick Lumumba, who she named as the murderer under intense police questioning without a lawyer or qualified translator. A court ordered a retrial, only for Knox to be convicted for a second time.
It's an unjust and incorrect verdict. I was abused, mistreated. I was psychologically tortured by the police that night. I feel sad, but determined, because I will never stop telling the truth. I didn't slander Patrick. I didn't slander him, like I didn't kill my friend.
Knox will not return to prison, the 3-year sentence already served, but the lengthy legal battles left its mark.
Sono 17 anni che sono ingiustamente accusata.
I have been unjustly accused for 17 years. That is my entire adult life. I spent 4 years in prison as an innocent. From the beginning, I just wanted to do the right thing and tell the truth.
And Amanda Knox's fight to clear her name in Italy is far from over. with a vow to appeal this latest conviction. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News.
Well, that's all for tonight's edition of The World on the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. We will leave you with some of the best pictures from the extraordinarily moving and powerful 2 days of commemorations today and yesterday. Good night.